The United States of America is a nation built from many stories of indigenous civilizations, European colonization, revolution, civil war, industrial might, social struggle, and global influence. Its history is marked by ideals of liberty and equality, yet also by contradiction, slavery beside freedom, opportunity beside exclusion, democracy beside violence. Understanding the United States requires tracing how these forces shaped a continent into a modern superpower. Before 1492, Indigenous America. Long before Europeans arrived, North America was home to hundreds of native nations with complex cultures and economies. Diverse civilizations, the Mississippian culture built great cities like Cahokia. The Iroquois forms the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Pueblo peoples engineered adobe towns and irrigation systems in the Southwest. Trade networks, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf, and obsidian from the Rockies moved along vast trade routes. Worldviews. Indigenous societies emphasized kinship with the land, communal responsibility, and spiritual traditions tied to nature. These civilizations were not static. They rose, adapted to climate change, and interacted through diplomacy and conflict. 2. European contact and colonization, 1492 to 1763. The Columbian Exchange. Christopher Columbus's 1492 voyage linked Europe, Africa, and the Americas, unleashing exchanges of crops, animals, and diseases. Smallpox and measles devastated native populations, killing millions. Colonial empires. Established St. Augustine, 1565, and missions across the Southwest. French built fur trading networks along the St. Lawrence and Mississippi. English founded Jamestown, 1607, and Plymouth, 1620, later 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast. Slavery takes root. By 1619, enslaved Africans were brought to Virginia. Plantation economies based on tobacco, rice, and later cotton tied the colonies to the brutal Atlantic slave trade, shaping racial hierarchies that would endure for centuries. 3. Revolution and nation building, 1763 to 1800. Causes of revolution. After the French and Indian War, Britain taxed the colonies to pay debts. Colonists protested taxation without representation, leading to the Boston Tea Party in 1773 and armed conflict in 1775. Independence. Declaration of Independence 1776, authored largely by Thomas Jefferson, proclaiming natural rights. Revolutionary War. With French aid, American forces won at Yorktown in 1781. Creating a government. Constitution, 1787, established federalism, separation of powers, and checks and balances. Bill of Rights, 1791, guaranteed freedoms of speech, religion, and due process. Yet women, native peoples, and the enslaved were excluded from this new democracy. 4. Expansion and division, 1800 to 1860. Westward growth. Louisiana Purchase, 1803, doubled the nation's size. Manifest destiny. The belief that the U.S. was destined to span the continent justified displacement of native nations through policies like the Trail of Tears in the 1830s. Economic transformation. The North industrialized, the South deepened its dependence on slave labor for cotton. Inventions like the cotton gin and railroads reshaped life. Rising tensions. Compromises over whether new states would allow slavery, Missouri 1820, Kansas, Nebraska 1854, failed to calm conflict. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1660 triggered secession. 5. Civil War and Reconstruction, 1861 to 1877. The Civil War, Union versus Confederacy, the bloodiest war in American history, over 600,000 dead. Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, turned the war into a fight against slavery. Union Victory, 1865, preserved the nation. Reconstruction, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments abolished slavery, granted citizenship and voting rights to black men. Backlash produced Jim Crow segregation and racial terror, undermining these gains. 6. Industrial America and Empire, 1877 to 1914. The Gilded Age. Steel, oil, and rail tycoons, Carnegie, Rockefeller, created vast fortunes. Cities swelled with immigrants from Europe and Asia. Social struggles, labor strikes, women's suffrage movements, and populist farmers challenged inequality. Overseas expansion. The Spanish-American War of 1898 brought Puerto Rico, Guam, and influence over Cuba and the Philippines, signaling America's emergence as an imperial power. 7. World Wars and the Great Depression, 1914 to 1945. World War I. The U.S. joined in 1917, tipping the balance for the Allies. Afterwards, it retreated into isolationism. The Great Depression. The 1929 stock market crash caused mass unemployment. Millions lost homes. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal created Social Security, labor protections, and public works, redefining the role of government. World War II. After Pearl Harbor, 1941, the U.S. mobilized vast industry. Defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945, introduced the nuclear age. 8. Cold War and Civil Rights, 1945 to 1975. Global rivalry. The U.S. confronted the Soviet Union through NATO, the Marshall Plan, and wars in Korea and Vietnam. Domestic change. Civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and others ended legal segregation with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965. Movements for women's liberation, LGBTQ+ rights, and native sovereignty reshaped society. Crises. Assassinations, Vietnam protests, and Watergate eroded trust in government. 9. From Reagan to the New Millennium, 1975 to 2001. Conservative turn. Ronald Reagan promoted free markets and military buildup. The Cold War ended with the Soviet collapse in 1991. Technological boom. Personal computers and the internet transformed the economy and culture. Persistent issues. Deindustrialization hurt many communities, mass incarceration expanded, and debates over immigration intensified. 10. The 21st century, 2001 to present. War on Terror. The attacks of September 11, 2001 led to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and new security policies. Economic and social upheaval. 2008 financial crisis triggered recession and reforms. Election of Barack Obama 2008 symbolized racial progress, while polarization deepened. New challenges. Movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and fights over immigration and voting rights. The COVID-19 pandemic tested institutions. Geopolitical rivalry with China and debates over America's global role continue. Conclusion. An unfinished experiment. The United States has never been a finished project. Its history is a constant argument over the meaning of freedom, who belongs, who holds power, and how ideals match reality. From indigenous nations to a diverse modern society, the American story is one of creativity and conflict, injustice and reform. Understanding that complexity is essential to imagining its future. 11. America after 9/11. Security, War, and Surveillance, 2001 to 2008. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 marked one of the sharpest turning points in U.S. history. Nearly 3,000 people were killed when hijacked planes struck New York and Washington, D.C. The sense of geographical invulnerability that Americans had felt since the Civil War vanished overnight. The War on Terror. The US invaded Afghanistan in 2001 to destroy al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban government. In 2003, the Bush administration launched the Iraq War, claiming Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, claims later proven false. These conflicts became America's longest wars, costing trillions of dollars and reshaping the Middle East. Homeland Security State. The Patriot Act expanded government surveillance powers. The Department of Homeland Security and the TSA transformed travel and privacy norms. Guantanamo Bay and the use of enhanced interrogation sparked global controversy over human rights. Cultural impact. Fear, patriotism, and anger mixed together. Country music, films, and television reflected themes of heroism and grief, while critics warned that civil liberties were being sacrificed. 23. Everyday life across the centuries. A. Colonial life, 1700s. Most Americans were farmers. Days were ruled by the sun and seasons. Houses were small, lit by candles. Children worked beside parents. Church was the center of community. Life expectancy barely reached 40. Freedom for some depended on bondage for others. Enslaved Africans built the wealth of port cities like Charleston and New Orleans while having no rights of their own. B. The frontier, 1800s. Wagons rolled west on the Oregon and Santa Fe trails. Families traveled for months facing disease and raids. Railroads created boomtowns overnight. Buffalo herds disappeared as native nations were forced onto reservations. The myth of the self-reliant cowboy was born, though real Western life included Mexicans, Chinese railroad workers, black soldiers, and countless indigenous peoples rarely shown in legend. C. The industrial city, 1900s. By 1900, New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh thundered with factories. Tenements housed immigrant families in 1 or 2 rooms. Children sold newspapers in the streets. Unions fought for the 8-hour workday. Electric lights, elevators, and subways created a new kind of human being, the modern urban American. D. Suburban dream, 1950s. After World War II, millions moved to suburbs like Levittown. Veterans bought homes with GI Bill loans. Television shaped a common culture. Rock and roll frightened parents and thrilled teenagers. But this dream was often closed to black families through discriminatory housing laws, planting seeds of later unrest. E. Digital life, 2000s. By the early 21st century, dating, shopping, and politics moved online. Work followed people home through email. A person could carry the world's knowledge in a pocket. America became less a place and more a network. 24. Voices that shaped the nation. Leaders. George Washington proved power could be surrendered. Abraham Lincoln preserved the Union and ended slavery. Franklin Roosevelt taught government to protect the vulnerable. Martin Luther King Jr. forced America to face its conscience. Ordinary heroes. Harriet Tubman guiding the enslaved to freedom. Cesar Chavez organizing farm workers. The unknown soldiers at Normandy. Nurses in COVID hospital wards. American history was never made only by presidents. 25. Contradictions at the heart of America. Freedom and slavery existing at the same time. Immigrants welcomed yet feared. Wealth beside poverty. Religion inspiring both tolerance and persecution. A nation of laws that often had to be broken to achieve justice. These contradictions created tension, but also movement forward. 26. Symbols of the American idea. The Constitution, belief in written rules above kings. The frontier, faith in new beginnings. The Statue of Liberty, promise to the outsider. Jazz and hip-hop, creativity born from struggle. The vote, the simple, radical notion that power comes from people. 27. Lessons from the long story. Democracies are fragile and require constant care. Diversity has been conflict, but also genius. Economic opportunity determines social peace. Movements from below change more than speeches from above. 28. Opening toward tomorrow. The next decades will test questions earlier generations never faced. Can AI remain under human control? Can a car-based nation survive climate limits? Can truth exist in an age of deepfakes? Can a multiracial republic stay united without a single dominant culture? The answers will decide whether the American experiment continues or becomes another chapter like Rome or Britain in the long history of rising and falling powers. Where should we go next? I can keep expanding in several powerful directions. Chapter-style deep dives. Native American history, pre-1492 to today. Slavery to civil rights to mass incarceration. The space race in American science. Immigration stories by decade. Documentary script version. Narrator text, scene descriptions, archive footage suggestions, music cues. Educational edition. Exam questions, glossary of key terms, timeline tables. 29. The Native American story, survival within a new nation. From allies to obstacles, 1776 to 1830. When the United States was born, more than 1,000 indigenous nations still controlled most of the continent. During the Revolution, many tribes tried to remain neutral. Others sided with Britain, believing the crown less hungry for land than American settlers. The new republic quickly revealed its intentions. Treaties were signed and repeatedly broken. The Northwest Indian War in the 1990s ended with U.S. victory and massive land loss. Presidents spoke of civilizing native peoples while encouraging settlers to push west. Thomas Jefferson imagined Indians would either adopt European-style farming or disappear. The Age of Removal in 1830s. The turning point came under Andrew Jackson. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced southeastern nations off their homelands. The Trail of Tears killed thousands through hunger, disease, and exposure. Gold discoveries in Georgia and Alabama mattered more than any treaty. The Supreme Court even ruled in favor of the Cherokee, but Jackson ignored the decision, revealing the weakness of native rights in American law. Life on reservations, 1850 to 1900. As the United States pushed to the Pacific, buffalo were slaughtered to starve Plains nations into submission. Wars with the Sioux, Cheyenne, Apache, and others ended in massacres such as Wounded Knee, 1890. Children were taken to boarding schools where speaking native languages was punished. Kill the Indian, save the man. Reservations were meant not as homelands but as tools of control. Resistance and adaptation. Yet native peoples never vanished. The Nez Perce under Chief Joseph fought a brilliant retreat in 1877. The Navajo rebuilt flocks and culture after the Long Walk. The Iroquois Confederacy continued to influence ideas of federalism. Survival itself became a form of resistance. The 20th century rebirth. New Deal for Indians. In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act ended allotment policies and allowed tribal governments to reform. World War II. Tens of thousands served in the U.S. military. Navajo code talkers helped win the Pacific War using their language as an unbreakable code. Red Power movement. In the 1960s to 1970s, a new generation demanded sovereignty. Occupation of Alcatraz, 1969. Wounded Knee protest, 1973. The American Indian movement forced America to listen again. Native America today. Modern indigenous life is diverse. Some reservations operate casinos and colleges. Tribes fight for water rights, sacred lands, and missing indigenous women. Languages once near death are being taught to children again. The United States finally recognizes, at least in words, that native nations are not relics but living governments. Why this matters to the whole American story. The United States was built on existing nations, not empty land. American democracy borrowed ideas from indigenous confederacies while destroying them. Every debate about borders, environment, and sovereignty echoes this original conflict. The first Americans are still shaping the future of America. 30. Transition to the next chapter. From here, the national story flows into other crucial currents: the creation of slavery and African American life, immigration waves that remade cities, the Cold War at home and abroad, space, technology, and the digital age. 31. Slavery, The Foundation and the Wound, 1619 to 1865. The birth of a slave society. In 1619, the first recorded Africans were brought to Virginia. What began as a small labor system hardened into a racial caste that shaped the entire economy. Southern colonies built plantations of tobacco, rice, and indigo. Laws turned Africans and their children into permanent property. Families were sold apart. Literacy was often forbidden. By the time of the Revolution, nearly 1 in 5 people in the colonies was enslaved. Contradiction at independence. The Declaration of Independence spoke of equality while 500,000 people remained in chains. The Constitution protected slavery through compromises, counting enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for representation, guaranteeing return of fugitive slaves, delaying any ban on the slave trade until 1808. Freedom and bondage were born together. Life under slavery. Enslaved communities created their own world within oppression. Secret churches blended African and Christian traditions. Spirituals carried coded messages. Skilled artisans built cities like Charleston and Richmond. Resistance took many forms: work slowdowns, escape, and open rebellion, such as Nat Turner's revolt in 1831. Abolition and the road to war. The movement. Frederick Douglass exposed slavery through his writings. Harriet Tubman led dozens to freedom on the Underground Railroad. White and black abolitionists built a moral crusade. Breaking point. The expansion of slavery westward split the nation. Fugitive Slave Act outraged the North. Uncle Tom's Cabin changed public opinion. John Brown's raid in 1859 convinced the South that compromise was over. Emancipation and Civil War. Abraham Lincoln initially